right, you can have a seat. All right, since you're so talkative, let's get a good one. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. This is your first time here at Hill City. My name is John Wagler. I'm part of this team and grateful that you are here and hope that Hill City becomes a place that you'll be able to call home. And just thank you for being here. We have a ton going on here. Discipleship signups are here. Yes. And so if you guys don't know, I feel like I should be a little more energetic on that, but in case you guys don't know, discipleship is the lifeblood of our church. Sundays are awesome, but really discipleship is what we're about. That's where you're in smaller groups of people, really learning and growing in your faith, challenging one another, holding one another accountable to taking steps in that. And a depth of faith is maturity happens through that. And so if you've got questions or anything, everything is back there, or you can scan your QR code, which everything I'm talking about is on there as well. So that's an exciting thing that's happening. Another thing is Joe Miller, who is our executive pastor. Joe's great. He was gone for 8 weeks on sabbatical, and he came back this morning. We're talking, and he's like, man, I have not checked our bank account in 8 weeks. This is a big deal. He checks it hourly, I think. And so I say all of that to just say this. Thank you guys so much for your incredible generosity, being committed to making Hill City what it is in this community. We are connected to so many different organizations that we partner with. And for those of you who don't know, we've given away over our first 11 years we're probably by the end of next year or midway through next year, we'll be kind of hovering in about $3 million we've been able to give away, to partners and everything, which is really great. And that helps, tens of thousands of people. And so you're a part of those stories and what's developing. And thank you. As you guys can tell, we're doing a bunch of renovations here to make this more of a community space and having a lot more communal things happening here for the good of Richmond. And so thank you for being a part of that as well. We'd love everyone to jump in. If you want to learn more about that, you can scan the QR code in front of you as well. We've been showing these stories. Today's story is awesome. It's one of our high school students, and I'll share a little bit more what's happening within our student ministry when it's done. But our story today about life transformation through Jesus is from our friend Andy. So let's take a look at Andy's story.
Spring of 2024, my friend Max told me to come to an all-in weekend, and I was like, sure. I wasn't doing anything, so I was like, why not? And it was really fun. Met a lot of people that were really nice and I liked, and so Max invited me to church the next Sunday. So I was like, sure. And I go, and I didn't really know anything about Jesus or anything like that, so I was just kind of going to see what it was like, and I kept going, and it was really enjoyable. I loved all the people I was with, and I don't know, I just grew closer and closer with God. I was just really open to trying new things because I didn't know anything about it, and I just enjoyed it and kept learning more and more. Everyone was saying how different I was becoming, and I don't know, they just saw a lot of change in me since I started going to church. I guess learning more about God, it makes me feel so much more joyful, knowing God and what He does. It helps me in friendships, because I used to be I don't know, one of the popular kids and did bad things. So not making bad decisions, and I hang out with my church friends way more because I enjoy that. It helps me make way better decisions. I don't do I've never done it, but I don't do drugs, and I feel that's just, I feel that would pull me away from God. But the people at Hill City, they'll actually if they think I'm saying something wrong, oh, I'm gonna do this, they'll actually tell me you shouldn't do that, rather than other people, they're just gonna be oh yeah, you should do that, go drink, go to that party. My leaders especially, they're so easy to talk to about everything. I went to Florida for a high school camp, and one of the nights the pastor was preaching about, he was telling us 3 categories. He was at the end of this, I'm gonna ask you to stand up, and the first group will be if you're like saying yes to Jesus for the first time. Second group, if you're like recommitting your life to Jesus. And the third group is like, if you feel called to go into ministry. And he was like, everyone just like pray about it if you're one of these categories. And so I was like praying, and I was thinking like, okay, like I just started serving in like middle school, and I'm kind of already like a leader, and I feel like this could be me, maybe this third category. And I was praying about it, and I was like, I wasn't really getting a sign to stand up, so I was just like, I don't know, like still wasn't sure. And then at the end he was like, all right, like stand up for the first group, stand up for second. And then he gets the third one, he was like, I'm getting the feeling that there's like one or two people in this room that didn't really know much about Jesus until recently, and they need a sign to stand up. And I was like, I just started like crying, and I was like, this is crazy, like this is literally me. And so I stood up, and he like asked everyone who stood up to go to the front, and he like prayed for us, and it was amazing. It's an amazing moment. It's really fun and like enjoyable to influence like people younger than me now, because like now that I'm like following Jesus, I can like help them, because I'm still in high school, so I'm still a kid, so like I relate to them a lot, you know, be someone that they can trust moving on in life. I think I'm just excited to like learn more, because I've only been following Jesus for like a year, so like I'm excited to learn more about like what this can do for me, and like what it can do for like my relationships. Having like this youth group is like gonna change a lot, just like going forward. Like a lot of friends in like high school and stuff, like you probably won't be friends with like your whole life, but like a group like this through church, and like going on like retreats and camps and stuff like that, and like, you know, seeing all the time, I think is like great. And it helped, like, I don't know, I feel like really strong connection with like all of them, and I'll have those friendships for a long time.
So just to share a little bit about what's happening in our youth ministry right now. One, it's rapidly growing, but Lacey and I had an opportunity to sit with a bunch of the leaders of the group, including our youth pastor Lex, and a couple of her youth leaders. And we had a chance to sit with them and just help cultivate vision of like what could be, and dream together. And for them, one of their dreams, so a lot of them come on to the early service at 9 because they serve during this service. And so you will see, if you have kids in our kids ministry, like you see a bunch of our students, like our kids ministry wouldn't happen without them to the level that it happens. And so say thank you to them, because like it's so wonderful when they're serving like that. But they're all like serving and coming, but they want to fill this whole entire section of students. And they were like, could we do it in both services? I was like, sure, that's great, you know. And so they have this like deep desire. So they're praying at their schools, they're praying for fellow students and friends, they're praying for teachers, and there's some really cool stuff that is happening. And so if you don't know, if you don't have kids, like on a typical Sunday right now, we will have over 300 some odd kids in elementary school, in middle school, like in our building, like in kid-specific spaces, having like learning about Jesus. It's wonderful. And a lot of times you'll see like our middle and high school students serving in different areas, and then our high school students are also serving in middle school. So it's a pretty cool thing that's happening with all of our students. And so if you have a student or and they're not involved, like it'd be wonderful to have them involved. All right, so it's awesome. So when you see them, like give them a high five and say, "You're doing great, guys. Awesome." Hey, we are in this series in the Gospel of John. If you don't know anything about the Bible, it's cool. There are 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Bible is broken up into an Old Testament and a New Testament, and the hinge point are all these Gospels. And the hinge point is because it's about Jesus, about his life, about his death, about his resurrection, about his teachings. And John is one of the writers of one of the 4 Gospels, and he starts to detail out things in a different perspective than some of the other writers. He tells some different stories, or if he does tell the same story as the other guys, it's often from a different like way of like seeing the moment. And so that's why I love John so much. And so today we're going to be one of a pretty famous story of a guy who was paralyzed and was sitting at the pool, and Jesus comes to heal him. And so we'll be in John chapter 5 if you have your Bibles and you want to take them out, but we're going to stand for the reading here in just a second. But before we get there, I want to ask you this. How many of you guys have ever said something like this when talking to God? Excuse me, why did you do that? Or why won't you? Or she got what? Or he found who? Or do you hear me? Or what the heck, or whatever four-letter word you might use there. Why me and why now? Could you make this any harder? Seriously, that's your plan? How is this supposed to be good? They don't even care about you. Why bless them? What's the point of praying if this is how it's going to end up? Where are you when I need you? Anyone say anything like that ever to God? The rest of you are lying, so that's great. And so if you've been in faith or, like trying to figure out your faith with God for any length of time, like we go through these moments where we've been praying for something and expecting something and we don't get it. We've been longing for something and desiring something that can be good and maybe we don't get it, or someone else gets something that we really desired and we get upset with God around that. I was also thinking about this too when it comes to figuring out what it means to be in tune with God. How many times in my life I look back and I see all the ways God was initiating with me and I didn't see it at the time. You go through and like you might end up like looking like this, like your faith board looks like one of those crime boards, and you end up seeing like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I met that guy who was connected to this guy who was connected to this person. I ended up there and talked to that person. It's all these like cool ways that God actually begins to interact with us. And we have these moments, and we all do. And here's what's interesting, and why I just want you to take this part in. Right now, in this part of your life, you are missing out here and there on how God's initiating with you. We just are. You'll look back at this moment of your life 2-3 years from now, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe he was doing that, and I didn't see it. And some of that is because we're not sensitive enough to the way God's working in our life, something we get so easily distracted, whatever reason it might be. But we all can get in those spaces. Or how about this question? How many of you have abused God's grace? Yes. So I ask all of those questions because I just want you to let you know like who's in the room with you. So you might be sitting here, you might have walked in here thinking like, oh man, they really got it together. They don't. Like, man, their walk with Jesus has been a 10 at all times. It hasn't. All right? And so I want you to like feel that part of the room, because you might have walked in here thinking like you're really frustrated or angry or doubting God, or you might be thinking you've been praying like crazy and I want to hear you. You might be thinking, and you're the only person who goes into that space. You might be thinking, I've done too much. God would never love me as I am. And I want you to know you are in a room full of people that have been in the same spot. And so here's the reality of following Jesus. It's way messier than Christians typically talk about. A lot of times we as Christians will say something like this, man, if you just start following Jesus, like I'm telling you, everything starts lining up perfectly. You'll get that job, you'll get that girl, you'll have that baby, you'll get that promotion, you'll get that house. And like maybe that's some people's stories, but sometimes people start following Jesus and in a practical way, their life gets worse. They get sick or they lose a job or something happens. But at the center of it, though, is like, who are you becoming in the midst of those things, in the good and the bad? Who are you focusing on, and what's the centering point of how you're living your life in the midst of the celebrations and also in the times where it's really tough? The story we're going to read about here in just a minute like taps into this. And it's interesting because there's another piece of this story that ties into our modern day experience right now. Right now, there's this incredibly sharp rise of spirituality all throughout the world. There's a lot of things. Some of it, there is like a movement towards Jesus in some spaces, but there's just like a general movement towards spirituality. I think the reality is because people are seeing the brokenness of the world around them, and it's like, man, this stuff just doesn't work. We're seeing like someone's pulling back the curtain, you're starting to see all the political stuff and what's really happening behind the scenes, and we're like shocked by some of it. Some of it we're seeing like so on a large scale in different countries, and then you're seeing it even on smaller scales locally, and with different people like, man, all these things that they said would fix all this stuff and make me happy and make me feel fulfilled, it's like, it's not working. Every like healthy measure we have right now of research, or like what it means to be healthy, like it's actually like lower than it's ever been. And so what we were seeing before is like it doesn't work, like secular views don't work and progressive views don't work, and it's just like it's not working. We're centering our lives on the wrong thing. Even when you look at what's happening within the church world, it's like, why don't progressive churches grow and why don't ultra-conservative Christian churches grow? It's because they've married to something else besides Jesus. They've introduced something else besides Jesus into the communities, and so it's not actually fixated on Jesus. And so they brought in something else, which is called syncretism. And so when they do that, it's like they're ushering in something else with Jesus to say like, oh, we're this and Jesus. We're this and Jesus. And in the end, it's not that attractive. It's only attractive because you've made this whole thing about yourself. And so we see this as a reality. And so there's this huge draw. There's been a huge draw towards like things like crystals. And the big manifesting phase that people went through. Like that's like a big thing. It's like things like that everywhere, tarot cards and all this like astrology, all this stuff that's happening. Like people are like being way more drawn into those things because why? They're looking around and like, I see stuff that doesn't make sense and I need an answer. Something needs to save me from all of this. And so there's this deep attachment to what's happening. But here's the question that I actually want us to wrestle with today in the story. And I think this is the question people are asking. Do you want to get well? See, I think like there's this part of us where when you begin to really struggle, it's like, how do I get well? How do I understand what it means to be fulfilled? How do I step into the right kind of space? And Jesus in the story is going to ask this same question again to this man. Now, here are a few reminders before we read the story. One, even if you don't know anything about the Bible, we're going to walk along with each other in the midst of this. Two, I always want you to like figure out, who am I in this story? How do I relate to this the most? And you might be a different person than maybe someone else next to you. Three, whenever you read a Bible story, the details are there for a reason. And you can read it literally, and that's fine. But really, when you start reading a Bible story, the writers are so brilliant that they're tying in these details into a larger story at play for a reason for us to kind of take it in on a larger level. And so you're going to see this a lot in this story, and I'll highlight a few things that will reveal that. So if you are able, will you stand for today's reading? We're in John chapter 5. It says this, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. So he's already saying, hey, there's tens of thousands of people that are there together. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. All right, I'm going to highlight that a little bit more in just a minute. But I want you to know off the top that John is giving this little detail. In this part of the story was actually used to try and disprove the Bible for centuries. People would say like, oh, there's never been a pool of Bethesda, and there's never been the 5 colonnades in Jerusalem, and so like the Bible isn't real, and then archaeologists found it, so there's that. Verse 3, it says, here, a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Verse 4, someone read it. No, that's verse 5. There's no 4. So there's a little nugget. In some translations, there is verse 4, and others there's not. What it says in some translations is there was a belief that the water the angels would come and stir the water, and if you could make it to the water, you would be healed. That's what's there. All right, so one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. This is an important detail. In Deuteronomy, it says that the Israelites were in the wilderness for 38 years. Okay, so there's a bigger story tying into this as well. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned what he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him that same question, do you want to what? Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me get into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus says to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And once the man was cured, he picked up his mat and walked. The day on which he took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders, these are the Pharisees, said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. Classic case of missing the point. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. So this guy's like, I don't know, man, I'm healed. And he told me to do this, so I'm doing it. So they asked him, "Who is the fellow who told you to pick up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who made him well. So, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Amen? You can be seated. All right, there's a ton here. There's also this piece, you have the 38 years, the people wandering in wilderness, and part of the reason that the Israelites wandered in wilderness in the Old Testament for those 38 years was because there was a spiritual paralysis that was happening within them, and God was shaping them into a different kind of people. All right, so I want you to remember that because that'll tie in later. But there's this other piece that's happening here with this idea of them being at the pool of Bethesda and these 5 pools and the colonnades. There was a old Greek god. His name was Asclepius. And when he was around, he was known as the god of healing. And so they would have all these shrines towards him. And so in this area, they would have had, in the colonnades, they would have had these shrines to him because they believed where the shrine was, there was always a pool. And whenever there was a pool, that's where the healing happened. And you needed the pool to have that happen. So there was this big superstition that that's where healing could happen. Now, no one ever really saw people get healed in that way, but there was still this belief that that's what happened. What's interesting about this god was that he was known in Greek mythology to heal people, and actually one time it was told that he raised people from the dead as well, but he didn't have divine power. And so what John is actually doing right now, he is setting up this tension to happen within Greek mythology, and so not just for Jewish listeners, but for Gentile listeners listening and saying, hey, how you're viewing this whole God thing is not right. How you're seeing Jesus, I'm going to build some tension here for you Jewish folks. But then for the Gentiles, I want to build some tension here too, because you think it's this guy, but I'm telling you it's Jesus. You think he heals, but I'm telling you Jesus heals. You think about this idea about having divine power. Like he didn't even have divine power in Greek mythology, but Jesus has divine authority. And so he's setting up like, do you really want to get well? It's not about the pool. It's about Jesus. Do you really want to get well? It's not about your Greek god and superstition. It's about Jesus. And so he's adding in all of these layers of understanding and tension within this story. What I love about this as he gets into this, he keeps going back to this idea and back to our question, do you want to get well? And that is the question that we need to wrestle with. Like, do I actually want to get well? We think that story, when you read the story, you might be thinking, oh, is Jesus asking him that to be healed from his sickness? And the answer is no. It's actually not why he's asking him that. He's asking him that because he's referring to something deeper inside of him. Do you want to get well, inside, in the core of your being, to be able to see what your life is actually really about? That's what he's actually asking him. So the healing does happen, but it's not actually about the healing. It's about something deeper that's actually going on that Jesus is trying to be engrafting him into. It's like, do you really want to be well, or do you want something superficial? And so he's tapping into something at a deeper level. So the first thing that I want to ask is this. Are you okay with God's timing? How many guys are like, yes, I love God's timing. He's always on time. Like, he's always on my schedule. I pray, he listens. I ask, he answers, right? Like, that's... Most of us, if not all of us in this room, have had a little problem with God's timing. And in this passage, it's interesting because it's like, this isn't on this man's time. It isn't on the religious teachers, the Pharisees. It's not on their time. It's not on their narrative. And it's just fascinating because what Jesus comes in and he does it on his own time. He initiates in his own way. And honestly, it's not even off of anything the guy did. The guy did nothing. He didn't even ask to be healed. So this is all on his own timing. Guy doesn't ask, he doesn't yell, he doesn't even know how to respond. It doesn't fit any of the narratives, and God's timing often won't fit our narrative. But if we want to be well, We have to have this surrender to God's timing, and that feels daunting at times. But if we really want to be well, then we're like, God, I know this desire I have is good, and I think it's right for me, but I want to be well, and so we have to be okay with that. Can you imagine being one of the other sick people around? Because there have been plenty of people laying around the pool wanting to be healed, like wondering if they could just get to the pool because they thought that's where healing was at. Can you imagine being one of those guys who is laying there, and again, this guy's been there for 38 years, and let's just say you were there next to him and you've been there for 6 months, or maybe you've been there for longer, whatever. And Jesus just walks up. This guy's done nothing, and he just says, hey, pick up your mat and walk. What would you do there? Would you be like, yes, my time will come? Or would you be like, whoa, what about my mat? I want to be healed. What about the thing I'm praying for? Why does he get to get it? And why do I don't? What? Why is it on your time? What about my timing? Would you be like that? How many of you guys are really cool with things being unfair? Sometimes you'll notice this when you're trying to follow Jesus, things are going to feel unfair because you've done the right things. You've been around the right people, and maybe something didn't work out as well as you thought. And in those moments, it's, do I really want to be well? Or do I just want the pool? Do I want the superstition of Jesus, or do I want the reality of Jesus? Do I want the artificial thing that I think will make me well, or do you really want to be well through Jesus? If so, then we start being okay with his pace. Or how about this? What if your healing or being well is in a way that you don't actually want it to be? Are you okay with it? It's tough. But to be fully well, that's what Jesus is tapping in here. Do you want to fully be well? Is this guy worthy to be healed? Nope. But he receives incredible grace from Jesus in this moment. He did not deserve it. Do you deserve grace from Jesus? No. Do I deserve grace from Jesus? No. But man, he offers up this incredible grace, not because he was worthy, but because Jesus saves. And so we even step into this place that what John is actually doing, he's actually speaking to the listener, being like, you think all these other things will save you, but only Jesus can save you. You think all these other things will make you well, but only Jesus can make you well. And so he's speaking into that reality as well. Here's another question I want you to wrestle with. How are you like the man who was healed? You might be thinking, I'm not. Maybe. He's okay with superstition. Now, I don't want to, he has a belief in the pool. Eventually the pool becomes irrelevant in Jesus. But he has a belief in this pool and a superstition that's happening there. And I don't mean like you have like a lucky t-shirt that you wear as like that kind of like silly superstition. I played baseball in college, and baseball players are, I would argue, are the most superstitious athletes alive. And you have a superstition for everything. And I remember we would have like things. If you win a few games in a row, it's like you're wearing the same socks, you're wearing the same shirt. We don't want to change uniforms. If you're on a rally, and you're on a comeback, and we score a run, and everyone comes to celebrate, and everyone's like, would start yelling immediately, same seats, same seats, same seats, as if that mattered. But like you turn your hat a certain way, you do the same rhythm of things. We used to have something called the run turtle, and every year one senior would be dedicated to drawing the run turtle. And so what would happen is so you couldn't use it all the time. It was just at certain moments that we felt like it was appropriate for the run turtle to come out. And so someone would be like, we need a run turtle. And so the senior would come out. He would draw with a bat, and it had to be a specific bat, would draw in a turtle, and then we would spit in it for the inning. That's what happened. And did it work? In our heads, it worked, okay? And so I'm not talking about like superstitions like that. I'm talking about, are you like looking at things and getting into some other things, bringing into your faith that you're allowing it equal weight with Jesus? And you're saying like, I could manifest that. Or you're kind of getting into crystals or astrology or some different things like that in the spiritual realm. But you're like bringing that into like competition with Jesus. That maybe you have a little bit more like that. Maybe you're like the man who has like a scripted answer. Jesus comes to him and he says this. Now, it makes sense. He's been there for 38 years. And Jesus is like, do you want to get well? And he has like a scripted answer. He's like, well, I mean, sure, in theory, but I can't get up and people always beat me to the pool, so I'll never get there. And I started thinking about this. I wonder how many of us as Christians have a scripted answer when someone says, are you a Christian? And you're like, yes, but internally you actually know that you lack passion, you lack desire, you lack wonder and surprise in your life. And so you have a scripted answer that you're following Jesus, but it isn't actually someone who's really well. Maybe you're more like him there. Maybe you're like him where, do you notice he doesn't say thank you? He just picks up his mat and goes. He doesn't say thank you. How many of y'all remember your parents repeatedly being like, say thank you? I often wonder sometimes with God, when I was praying this week, and I was like, man, I wonder how often over the course of my life he's been like, and? As I'm praying for stuff, he's like, we've done this, right? I'm like, oh, maybe I'm more like the guy than I thought with like a lack of gratitude towards the way God's trying to make me well. Or maybe you're more like him when you don't really want to change and we abuse grace. If you remember in the story, see, here's what's interesting about this guy's story. We don't actually know if he came to faith in Jesus. We don't know if he follows Jesus. We might make an assumption that he does, but we don't actually know. So he has this moment with God, with Jesus, and he steps in and he gets healed and everything else, but it just says Jesus he heals, walks away. The guy doesn't even know. The Pharisees, the religious leaders are like, who healed you? Why are you carrying your mat? And he's like, that dude told me I could. And then he comes back, Jesus comes back later on, finds the guy in the temple who's standing there, and he goes, hey dude, stop sinning. See, it seems like what Jesus is saying is like, dude, you're abusing my grace. You didn't deserve that, but I gave it to you anyway. Like, you're abusing my grace. When I was thinking about grace is free, but it is not a permission to settle. Like, just because you've received grace, which is wonderful, doesn't mean you settle for where you're at. It calls us to something greater. Another thing is grace doesn't lower our standards, it raises them. So if we don't see grace in this way as like, oh, I have accountability, I have a responsibility within this, then we're going to abuse the grace that we've received, and again, we'll make it about us. I'm a big fan of vulnerability. I think everyone should have 2 or 3 people in their life that they're just 100% raw to. The good, the bad, the ugly, like we all need it, and I'm a huge fan of it. Here's a little caveat to vulnerability. You can also use vulnerability as a crutch to not change. And so here's where you can get into a little bit of a pickle. Vulnerability is a good thing, a great thing. But if you lack repentance on what you're being vulnerable about, that's taking you away from Jesus, eventually what will happen is you'll keep using vulnerability as a crutch to justify your actions and keep asking for grace for people, when actually what you need is vulnerability married with repentance, so you'll actually get change and not just stuck in a loop. And so yes to sharing, yes. You'll never be perfect. I love all that. But we should also be people of repentance and looking to change so we don't justify what's taking us away from Jesus. The last thing is this. How are you like the Pharisees? The Pharisees are religious teachers. What's interesting about these guys is, they were trying to set the culture and the tone for the entire community around what it means to follow God. And they missed it. They missed what Jesus was, most of them missed it. They missed how Jesus was initiating things. They missed what Jesus was talking about. They were going back to all these other narratives that they had in their head about what it all should look like, and they kept missing Jesus. Here are a few questions for you. Do you get mad when someone else gets what you wanted? How many guys would say yes? All right. Pharisee. Do you get mad when someone's story is outside of your normal religious parameters? It's Pharisees. We're like, oh, God would never work like that. First time that actually happened to me was this kid was sharing, this was so many years ago, I didn't share this in the first service, but this guy was sharing to me how he was tripping the most he had ever tripped on psychedelics in his life. And he was an addict, and he's telling me this story. He was only like 3 days removed from this happening. And he's like, you'll never believe what happened. I'm like as high as I've ever been, and I'm having like the best time, and all of a sudden I saw Jesus. And I was like, what did Jesus say? And he's like, he told me to stop. I'm ruining my life, and if I ever wanted to find fulfillment, I would find it in him. The first thought in my head, I was like, I don't know, man. Like, just could have been one bad mushroom there. I don't know that like that was like the reality of what happened. Here's what's cool. I got to know that guy for a long time, and we are not friends any longer, but like just because we grew apart in distance. But year after year, I started watching his faith, and I'm like, this dude's the most passionate dude for Jesus I've ever seen. He later became a pastor and became like this incredible evangelist for Jesus. But that was the story. But for my narrative at that point in my life, I was like, it would never happen. So sometimes y'all will even hear stories up here and you're like, I don't know. I don't know if that's the way it works. I don't know. And so I just want to challenge you that maybe you're being a lot like a Pharisee in that moment. And like when you're missing out on what Jesus might do. Or how about this? Do you get mad when the story is messy, nuanced, or complicated? Do you get mad when Jesus works in a way that doesn't fit your personal narrative? Or how about this? How often do you fall into comparison? That's what the Pharisees were doing. And here's what happens. When we start falling into comparison a lot, we become complainers. And so we will complain to God, like, why won't you do this? Why I've been praying for this. And here's what's like fascinating about complaints. Sometimes when I'm talking to people about complaints, we'll do this. I'm giving an example of a complaint. And the complaint is, I'm not as healthy as I want to be. So in every complaint that you have, whether it's, I'm talking about like a regular complaint, whether it's an actual spoken one you have or one you've internalized. You guys do know that, right? Like an internalized complaint that you have is still a complaint. And so if it's coming up all the time, it's still the same thing, has the same impact on your brain, on your body, and how you interact with life. And so what ends up happening is when I work with people around this idea of what you're complaining about, what I want them to see is you hold on to a complaint for a very select grouping of reasons. And I always ask people this, why are you holding on to this complaint? And 99% of the time they will say, no reason. I'm like, there is a reason. And I'll say this, I was like, what's the payoff? Or what's the benefit for you holding on to this complaint? And so we'll take this one as an example, because this is actually one I did with someone one time. And this person said, I'm not as healthy as I want to be. And I said, all right, what's the payoff or the benefit? They're like, there is not one. I'm like, there is one. And so I was helping them think through it. And eventually he started getting into this space. He's like, well, I save money because I don't have to pay for a gym membership. I was like, great. I was like, what else? He's like, well, actually, I don't have to be disciplined. And I can just kind of just go on as I am. I was like, awesome. He's like, what else? And he's like, honestly, like, I don't have to accept the challenge. I was like, great. So you've got challenge. I was like, anything else? He's like, yeah, I don't have to buy new clothes. I was like, cool. He's like, I don't have to be accountable. That feels nice. All right, so we ran through, actually ended up getting through 20 things, 15, 20 things. Of all the reasons he's hanging on to the complaint, because he feels like it's a benefit. Like that's the reason why you do it. If you didn't see the benefit of it, you wouldn't hold on to the complaint. And so then we work over here, and we're like, all right, what's the price? And he's like, I'll die. I will, he starts like going through like all these different things, like it actually cost me more money in the end. It's not good for my family, right? Kind of run through all those things. And so you name a complaint, this is like the reality. Well, that ends up starting because you live in a land of comparison with people. You start getting to these spaces with Jesus of not getting what you want, and we're just acting like the Pharisees were. One of the things that I often think about when I think about the Pharisees is because when we read these stories, we're so quick to be like, oh, I would never. And what I've come to realize about myself over the past few decades following Jesus, is I'm a lot more like the Pharisees than I dare care to admit. I would often think I would never have been the one shouting, "Crucify him." I never would have been the one that would have been there persecuting him, mocking him. But then when I start listing out some of the things the Pharisees have done as I read Scripture, I'm like, ooh, I don't know. I have taken Scripture out of context to try and justify a point before. I have gotten mad when people have gotten something that I wanted. I have gotten into a headspace where it didn't fit my personal narrative and questioned how God could work. And I started thinking about that. I started thinking about how easy it is for us to have our trust in God vary based on whether or not he answers our prayer. I realize how easy it is to be judgmental against someone who's had a different path than you have. Or maybe you've gotten into a space where you've had preference-driven worship, where you walk into a space and you're like, they don't sing like Lamont does, so I don't like that song anymore. Or I don't like that new one. I only like the old ones. What's interesting about that, when you get into that kind of space, just as a little caveat, you've actually inverted the person of the idea of worship, and rather than making about God, you've made it about yourself, and you've put your place in the place of God. And so we start seeing, in those kinds of spaces and understanding, it's I get it, we all have preferences, but it's just got to be careful what that looks like. And so, who are you in the story? Laura, you can come back up. The story starts with them in a pool, because that was a superstition. The pool becomes irrelevant because Jesus makes us well. The Jewish leaders, Pharisees, looking at Jesus, are only complaining about the narrative that they know. Jesus is the Lord over all of that. This idea of what does it mean to be well, we think it might be just what's physical, just what's tangible. But Jesus is really asking, do you really want to be well? I'm asking you to bow your heads. I just want you to sit with this for just a minute. We're going to sing a song to respond. Here's what I know about the way God works is God's always trying to initiate with us and speak with us, and he is right now for you, and it's different for everyone in the room. So, what's God trying to speak into your life this morning?